Chapter 20, The Meaning of Omniscience. What is omniscience? Those who have familiarized themselves to any extent with mystical or quasi-occult literature will have found it stated that there are levels or states where a man becomes omniscient, and yet at the same time it will be emphasized that no man is infallible. From the relative standpoint, these two statements seem incompatible, and the result is mystification, to say the least. But when properly understood, both statements can be true. The fact is, no man is omniscient on the relative level, and though the knowledge of such a one may be very great, transcending even the relative knowledge of any figure that has appeared upon the screen of history, yet beyond his attainment, whatever it may be, there lie further mysteries awaiting his resolution. In other words, we find no conceivable end to evolution. But while all this is true, there is another sense in which a man may awaken to omniscience, and maybe do so instantaneously. In fact, such an awakening cannot be a matter of gradual attainment, for the infinite is never realized by progressive additions of finite manifolds. It is all a question of level or state. The self is all knowledge, and as it encloses but is not enclosed or restrained by space, time, and causality, there is no question of development on this level, in this sense of progression by finite steps. He who has realized himself as the self is at once omniscient. But it should be remembered that the self is absolute. Emptiness, darkness, and silence from the relative standpoint. The self is the knowledge whence all proceeds, but this knowledge is not of the subject-object type, nor anything that could be conceived within the cognitive framework of the latter. The silence is all knowledge, while knowledge in the field of the subjective-objective becomes, and of this it is impossible to predicate infallibility. There is a way in which we may secure an adumbration of what all knowledge or voice of the silence is. Language is composed of words, designating objects in some sense, and sentences, words or terms, we may say, represent simple apprehensions and are analogous to simple consciousness. The sentences are representations of judgments, which are of the nature of recognition on the level of polarized consciousness, or that which Dr. Buch has called self-consciousness. Here all is posited in a world where an I, considered as distinct from other selves, is conceived as conscious of an object in some sense. Here also we have the meaning in a form that is definable, that is capable of representation in the form of other terms and the propositions, and in the strictest usage, meaning just those terms and propositions. But this is only formal meaning, and by itself it is barren. Now, over and above this manifold of formal knowledge, there is another meaning and significance which, while it may be aroused by words and sentences, is not contained in words and sentences. This higher meaning, when realized, is a veritable food for the soul and thence for the whole man. In general, men, by arousing momentary and partial recognitions, proceed to this meaning from below by the use of formal and empiric knowledge, employed with the appropriate skill. These momentary recognitions are adumbrations, though generally in a very minor degree, of that higher knowledge which is identical with divinity itself. This is the process when man bases himself in the external, the relative world. But for him who has made the ineffable transition, there is a radical difference. The man has then found his base in the self. The knowledge from which he now starts is the silence, and this is significance devoid of any words or ideas. Here, communion is on the level of significance itself, unfettered by any form. This is exhaustless refreshment, and there is no waste. Now, from this level, there can be a projection outward through ideas, and perchance ultimately reaching the relatively frozen state on the most objective plane of all, that is, the field of the visual universe. From the higher standpoint, meaning is the base and not the apex, as it is usually conceived. The universe is the final effect, but it is utterly dependent for its existence upon this base or foundation of meaning. This is why, from the standpoint of self, the universe is unreal. Now, on the level of meaning, a man may know with absolute certainty and yet express himself incorrectly when trying to fit his ideas within the already existing forms of expression. In this case, he shows himself to be quite fallible and yet knows what he is talking about, however incorrect his expression may be. If careful discrimination is not employed, it is easy for the outer man, even though he has awakened to realization, to fall into confusion at this point. Knowing the certainty that applies on the level where he really is, then, as outer man, he attaches this certainty to his formal expressions and thus falls into error. Outer correctness and approximation to correctness must be acquired by effort, even though the man has attained to a high order of realization. Informal knowledge, including all knowledge of things, whether gross or subtle, and all knowledge of relationships, processes, etc., technique is essential, including all possible methods of checking and control. Naturally, some men have gained more capacity in this than others, and so, in matters falling in their respective fields, have relative authority not possessed by others. Thus, in a matter of formal or empiric knowledge, it may often happen that a man who has not reached beyond the egoistic or self-conscious level can very easily correct another who is genuinely implanted in the silence. The latter does have, however, decisive advantages when seeking mastery in any relative field. He can acquire knowledge in the relative sense, but on a fraction of the time required by the others, for he has the advantage of commanding perspective. But in any case, even for him, some effort and time are required. Transcendent knowledge, or knowledge on the level of meaning, is acquired instantaneously and with certainty. But the attainment of relative knowledge always demands some time and effort and never gives certainty.